Alright guys, I haven't been active in a while, but I appreciate my subscribers and their love for my content. As usual, I like to read from a script. It just keeps me on point as I tend to tangent a lot. But most of my videos so far have been about ICRPG, or my system, which I've dubbed Honor Sworn. And today I'm going to keep it a little bit on theme. I'm going to be talking about ICRPG, but the main focus today is going to be on DC20 versus ICRPG versus D&D, all that sprinkled in there. Why am I not including Honor Sworn? Well, the reason I'm not including Honor Sworn is because it's designed as a DM-less RPG. So it's more intricate than ICRPG for that purpose, and I'm just trying to keep it one-to-one. I want to make sure that I'm just covering DM-run games. So I've played DC20, I have run ICRPG, and I have run D&D, and I've talked about the ups and downsides a lot in my main attraction video, which is ICRPG versus D&D. So today I highlight what brings DC20 to the table and some of its shortcomings. But to be fair, DC20 is still in beta, so it's not fully, flushed out yet. So, don't take some of these shortcomings personally, especially you, Alan, if you're watching this. I love DC20, and I think as is, it is good enough to have a conversation about, to run at the table, even though it's only in beta. So let's start with a quick overview of DC20 character creation and its mechanics. So for character creation, you start with 4 attributes, 2 mental and 2 physical. The physical attributes are might and agility, and the mental attributes are charisma and intelligence. There is actually a sort of 5th attribute. It's called your prime attribute. This attribute is the highest attribute you have. So when you pick your attributes from might, agility, charisma, intelligence, whichever one is your highest one, that is also the same score you have in your prime attribute. This prime attribute is connected to your save DC, it's connected to your physical attack, your mystical attack, or spellcasting. It's connected to a few other things, and it's also attributed to awareness, or in D&D terms, perception. What does this mean? This means that your prime attribute, your combat ability, is separated from your prime attributes. So if you want to run a buff wizard, you can run a buff wizard without it affecting your attack ability. If you want to run an intelligent barbarian, you can run an intelligent barbarian. It's not going to affect your attack. Now, if you take points out of might, it's gonna affect your grapple. But other than that, it's going to be focused on your hitting attacks. That's all going to happen. So that's really cool. Side note, this is one of the skills that I actually would love to see expanded upon. While the other 4 attributes have at least 3 skills related to it, I think this could be fleshed out a little bit more. There's a lot of DC20 that reminds me of 3.5e. which to many people is the best version of D&D. Though there aren't 20 plus skills in DC20, I think it would be better to split up awareness into 3 things. Just going back to 3.5e, listen, spot, smell. Have these different, senses separated, because beast kin and all of those things. There's a lot of tributes out there that enhance smell, enhance hearing. So splitting that up a little bit more, maybe adding a couple more points into character creation, or not. I think it would be fine if you split it up those 3 and you made someone choose one of those senses, because it depends on what you're trying to do. Are you trying to spot someone? Are you trying to catch a scent for tracking, or are you trying to listen through a door? Those are all very different abilities, and so awareness as a number, especially if you pick it as one of your proficient things, it's you're good at all 3. And I don't think that should necessarily be the case. That's just me. So I think it is really cool how DC20 purposed these 4 attributes. Might gives you bonuses to HP, intelligence gives you proficiency in additional skills, agility gives you bonuses to your physical defense, and charisma gives you bonuses to your mystical defense. That's right, there are 2 different defense stats in DC20, mental and physical, just like the 4 attributes. They're broken up into those 2 categories, and I think this is awesome. I know it's one extra number to keep track of, but I think it absolutely makes a difference. And how Alan just honed in on what those four things do and how they affect your character creation, I just look at it and think it makes sense. I won't lie, I wasn't an original backer for his Kickstarter for TC20. As much as I love Alan and the Dungeon Coach in his videos, in my head I was like, I've created my own TTRPG. I'll never run anything else. It's a variation of ICRPG. It's simple. It's customizable. That's what I was sitting there thinking, and I'm kicking myself for that mentality. When I downloaded the free PDF rules, I knew I made a mistake. I went into jumping back and forth through it. I tried to skip a lot of things, so I was like, it's just going to be the same as D&D. I didn't think it was going to be very different, and as I went back and forth, I was like, okay, I'm missing something. And I had to go back and just do a once through because I was just, staring at it and I was like thinking this just makes sense. It's very intuitive. It's under each attribute, Alan clearly describes how each attribute will affect different aspects of your character and in its creation. And it was so simple, and it made creating a character that much easier. Do I want more health? Do I want to be less likely to be hit? Do I want to be less likely to be affected by magic? Do I want more skills? It was just so straightforward. Speaking of attributes, as you level up, you just get attribute points. No more choosing between feats and ability points. You get both. Customization is the name of the game. You can still power build your characters in flavors you like, but it doesn't break the game. One of my players made this character a beast-born, spider-like monk with insane grapple abilities, and he just stacked everything into grapple, and that was just the way he played it. And it did a very good job of tying up one of my main monsters in the game we played, but I was still able to react and do things with that monster and affect his health. I got him really low a few times, so I wasn't feeling like that character was broken in any way. He was really good at one thing, but it was just that one thing. But I think he really loved playing that. He was setting up his teammates really well, and I'll get to combat in a minute. But that susceptibility to damage doesn't seem to change that much as you level up. As I look through it, and of course, if you increase certain abilities, those things will go up. But when you choose one thing, if you bring your HP up, your physical defense and your mental defense isn't affected. If you bring your mental defense, your HP and your physical defense aren't affected. And if you up your physical defense, your mental defense and your HP aren't affected. So there's always that susceptibility to a character, and I think this is just a really cool way. Again, DC20 isn't fully flushed out yet at higher levels, but one of the major concepts of DC20 scaling is making sure that the combat is scaled well enough for players to handle higher level combats without those combats dragging on. The theory of DC20 combat is that it shouldn't last more than 4 to 5 rounds, which I think is a common concept between RPGs, but if you've watched my videos in the past, you've heard me rave about heavier hitting combats, shorter combats, because I don't want to spend 3 hours in a combat, so that there is plenty of time for the story to progress. Right now, it is difficult for me to see how that will work in DC20. This is one of its shortcomings at the moment. Generally speaking, weapons deal about 1 or 2 points of damage. With a power attack thrown in, that's about 3 points of damage. If you roll 5 over the DC, that's 4. If you roll 10 over the DC, it's 5. So on average, there's about 3 to 4 points of damage per round at level 1 per character. But weapon damage doesn't increase with level, so even though spells deal more damage as they level when you pour more mana into it, and I'll go to there in a second, it's not yet clear how damage dealt by martial characters will scale to allow combat to resolve within 4 to 5 rounds with higher HP monsters, unless they do, special weapons that deal more damage than the regular ones. I'm not really sure how that's going to look. Again, beta, but this is one of the things that I am worried about or one of the shortcomings, because I just can't see it just yet. But this does allow me to segue into one concept of leveling that I love about DC20, and that's the goal of having the first 10 levels being where the magic happens. As Alan points out, on average, most D&D campaigns only last until levels 10 to 12. So in DC20, you obtain all your subclass features in the first 10 levels. I think this is awesome because you can look at your subclass features and just be bummed in D&D. You'll never get to use them because most games aren't going to go to level 18. Right now, levels 11 through 12 are what DC20 calls prestige levels for those campaigns that do go higher, but I know they are planning on reworking that. So stay tuned for that. Honestly, 10 levels will be plenty to start with, but I look forward to the ideas they come up with in the future, to seeing how they do scale the characters and go above level 10. I truly think this is one of the best goals for this system to solve, because scaling in D&D is actually tougher than it looks, and higher level combats are ridiculously long. I've seen comments from people saying that the rules show you exactly how to scale your combat, but rarely does it actually work out that way. DC20 has an equation for scaling combats that I've seen work really, really well, and it is really simple, but again, I'm only basing this on levels 1 and 2 at the moment. Back to ICRPG. There really aren't any levels in ICRPG. Monster HP doesn't really go over 100, and player hit points don't usually go above 30. ICRPG scales really well, and you of course have the freedom to customize your character however you like. When it comes to story-driven RPGs, nothing is as simple as ICRPG. 6 ability points, no skills, one-line spells, and character features. Customization in ICRPG is just too easy, So why am I leaning towards DC20? There are 2 big reasons I can kind of boil this down to: structure and combat. Let's start with structure. If you are a new player, ICRPG is no doubt easier to learn, and there are a few examples of classes and growth in the book, but it is relatively easy to run out of material. And if you don't have a great imagination, it can feel limiting. I have a player in one of my RPG games who just has no idea what to do as he levels up. He just doesn't have any imagination for it. He wants inspiration. He wants a book to look at. He wants options. And I think just ICRPG is just very limited in that aspect of resources. DC20 has a truly awesome approach to character leveling. That structure and plethora of options for players is very attractive, and the way that Alan has themed each martial character and each spellcaster to truly feel unique and amazing, it's just awesome. I just have no words. The blending of magic and martial in D&D is just a little janky in my opinion, and multi-classing just isn't very easy. DC20 simplifies that with its structure. Which brings me to DC20's main attraction, in my opinion, combat. You cannot have a strong structure without a well put together combat system. My other big video was no initiative combat, and here I am talking about initiative. So listen, everything has its time and place. I'm playing a story heavy game right now as a player, and I love it. And when we get into combat, it is fairly quickly resolved. Again, the main problem with D&D and other initiative combats is when you do them too much, they really slow down and bog down the story. That's not the experience I nor my players want to have. Alan often uses skill challenges to run combats that the players would easily win, but instead of running the whole combat, players must make a skill roll, and based on their success or failure, consequences happen. Loss of resources or health occurs in 5 minutes or less rather than an hour. So what's so cool about DC20 combat? The action points. Each player has 4 action points: 1 to move, 1 to take an action, it's 1 to attack, 1 to use a maneuver, 1 to use an opportunity attack. You can give yourself advantage with an action point. You can deal more damage with action points. What makes this so cool is the level of strategy that they bring to the combat. Some maneuvers can be used to protect allies, which allows you to tank. It also brings so much more to martial characters, which allows them to deal conditions to their targets, which can set up other players to be more likely to hit or deal extra damage. This makes parties work together in a way that is just unlike D&D and ICRPG, and the combats are still fairly quick. Spell slots are also replaced by mana, so most spells generally have a low cost, low number of targets, short duration, and affect a small area or just one target. But then they do more as you pour more mana into them. You can hit multiple targets, you can increase their area, you can increase the duration, you can increase the range. It just makes sense. Spell slots are so janky, I just don't understand them. And it leads to, situations where right now there's over 400 plus spells in D&D. Like, that's crazy. It may be a lot of options, but some of them are just so similar and just reflavored that it's just too much. It's too many options. But in DC20, they're just going to keep them. Here's your fire spell. It's going to hit 1 target if you pour 1 mana into it. It's going to hit 2 targets if you pour 2 mana into it. It's going to be an area like a fireball if you put 3 mana into it. Again, this isn't out yet. Spells haven't been fully fleshed out, but I can see where it's going. and I love it. And the low HP for characters and monsters makes the combat shorter. And as I mentioned previously, the DC20 has a simple math formula for scaling combat. I had to use this in my very first game, my very first one shot with it. It just, here it is, you know, and in the monster manual, it's just like, okay, this is how many players you have. This is how much AP the monsters need to have. This is how many action points the players have. This is how many action points the monsters should have, and vice versa. Here's how to make it more difficult. Here's how to make it easier. Just simple. Like, I just never felt that with D&D. And when I look at an encounter in D&D, I'm like, okay, this is probably fine. And if I've plugged in the math in D&D Beyond, and it's never right. It's never been right for me. But I also want to circle back to conditions really quickly. DC20 introduces a few more conditions. This will take you time to learn. I'm just going to be honest with you. And it's probably one of the most difficult things to keep track of in DC20. But learning is part of the game. I think they just add so much to combat tactics and weapon styles, because weapons will deal more damage based on if they're hitting certain type of creatures with conditions, and you can just do so much tactically, strategically. It's so much more fun. You just can't get tactics like these in ICRPG and D&D. I know D&D has some, but DC20 just makes it a must to use tactics in combat. And I think that adds so much flavor and RP to two parties when you're using those tactics. You want to speed through an unimportant combat with a skill challenge, you can. You want to have a meaningful combat with tactics, strategy, and player teamwork. Easy. That's exactly what DC20 was designed for. And as a DM who likes strategy games, it is beyond fun to run. I felt more like a player in DC20 combat than I did as a DM. I can honestly say that I have never had that feeling in D&D or ICRPG. So DC20 may be a little bit more complicated to run as a DM than ICRPG. I do think it is easier to run than D&D. Characters, monsters, they're way more customizable and fun. I can't wait to see the full system come out. I know I built this channel around ICRPG, but I'm gonna have to be devoting more time and videos to talking about DC20 as it develops in the future. I already know my next video is gonna be about house rules that I think do belong in DC20. But after that, I know I'm going to be starting to do some videos about some of the subclasses and some of the highlights between martial characters and the spellcasters and the different flavors. They're just so cool. They're a must read. I'm not going to give anything away, but I just want to get people excited about this. If you haven't heard about it, if you haven't checked it out yet, you need to do so. Happy holidays, and thanks for listening. And again, don't forget to check that like and subscribe button if you love the content. Thanks.